we were concerned to hear about the experience of our beloved Harry and Meghan. However, some recollections may vary.
Did you hear about my brother Willie? He asked me to shave off my beard for my wedding day. He wanted me to shave off my beard. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what Meghan might have said if she'd seen me when she came up the aisle and I was there with a bald face and she saw the real me? I couldn't put her through such a thing. Can you imagine? No, maybe you can't, but if you think that I'm very ridiculous, only beard people understand. This is what you have to know, my dear. Only beard people will understand my anger at William wanting me to shave my beard off. Well, to be honest with you, and in fairness, that is exactly the way that my wife reacted when I asked her to shave off her beard too.
Well, it's true to say, of course, that Her late Majesty was not a fan of beards. She didn't like them on Philip, she didn't like them on William, and as some have pointed out, it's not the done thing military-wise. It's frowned upon because it's against the rules in the military and bad form. But we've had some splendid beards in the royal family in the past, distant kings, distant relatives of the Queen's. So, I got to thinking about this, and I think perhaps it wasn't so much that she disapproved of beards, period. It was simply that she knew the kind of face that it would suit and that it wouldn't. And she was right about William, because I took a glance back at some photographs with William with a beard, and of course I've seen them before, and I remember thinking at the time, well, that's quite dishy. I like him with a beard because, ladies, girl talk, but is anything more divine really than being nibbled around the neck and this sort of area and many other areas, my dear? I guess I'm sitting on one of them. There's many areas that feel fabulous, my dear, when you've got some hirsute gentleman nibbling away as if he's at a royal banquet, my dear, at a feast. Isn't it divine? Isn't it absolutely divine? And, I digress. But when it comes to William, my dear, I looked at that photograph again and I thought, you know what? The beard doesn't suit William. It doesn't suit him. His beard was unkempt looking. It had an unkempt look to it, not especially dense. And it didn't do any favours for his teeth. He looked a bit rodent-like and ratty. It brought out the ratty features of his teeth, I'm afraid, which usually look like those proud Windsor teeth. Wonderful. But it brought out the ratty element to them. And also, it covered his jaw, which is one of his best features, that strong jawline, that big Willie jawline that we all know and love so very much, my dears. So, in contrast, Harry looks decidedly more attractive when half his face is covered in fur. And he has better fur, nice red fur, and it looks more plush when it's well groomed and manicured on the face, you see. So, perhaps the Queen was onto something there, and, I'm glad that Harry insisted on it in the event of his wedding, because he does look better with a beard there. But before we get on to any other nasty business, it was great to see the King, very reassuring to see him attending church yesterday in Norfolk at Castle Rising Church for the morning service. Business as usual. Very graceful, very dignified. And, of course, today, virtually the same day that Spare is being released. What a coincidence, my dears. Today is the 41st birthday of our fair Princess Catherine, so I'm sure you'll join me in wishing her many happy returns of the day, my dear. I'm actually going to be celebrating in style with a few select friends, and we'll be toasting the princess. It's what this luncheon is in honour of. It's being given in honour of her. So I'm excited about that. I'll see what we uncover there. And before we proceed, I want to give a very quick correction. A couple of broadcasts ago, it's only a trifling little thing, but I told you during that segment, I made the mistake of saying that the Queen had already died when Harry had the phone call with Charles before he went to Balmoral. It was such a silly mistake to make. I think it was just in the melee, in the rush of recording the broadcast. Some of you might have noticed it, but of course, Charles was not yet His Majesty when that phone call took place. So apologies for that silly error. So I want to hold forth on the first two interviews that aired, Bradby in the UK and Cooper in the the United States. I was very relieved that neither of them could be called puff pieces. You've got to give Harry props for this, because it's under his curatorship. He gets to say who interviews him. Of course, Bradby is a friend of his for 20 years, but he's been praised, actually. Bradby's been praised for challenging Harry, not letting him get off the hook for everything. Yes, he could have pushed harder at some points, he could. But come on, we could have had a lot more of a puff piece, syrupy affair without challenge if Harry had really demanded that. We could have. So we've got to bear that in mind. I'm sure that most of you would agree that Williams always resembled Diana a lot more than Harry, but it was curious, wasn't it, to see so many flashes of Diana during these interviews, so many. He does that sort of sniff that Diana does all the time, especially when he's challenged, especially if he's on the defensive. Flashes of Diana, which is rather disarming. I mean, you see it in William, of course, too, but his face looked more like Diana's, whereas Harry's always looked more like his father's side of the family, not like Major James Hewitt, as many are wont to say. They're entitled to their opinion, of course, but I see a lot of Charles's side in Harry. In fact, they flashed up a photograph where I saw Zara immediately, especially a younger Zara, in Harry's countenance. But absolutely, you could see the flashes of Diana in more ways than one. You could see them. I'm not into body language experts, my dear. I know they're very popular. I'm not into them, so please don't recommend any to me. But it was interesting, wasn't it, to see the various looks on Harry's face that he seemed to sort of glaze over and use in moments of deflection. His eyes would sort of glaze over as if he was sort of disassociating, then snap back with one of his tart replies. But his remarks about his brother's looks were on the salty side, weren't they? It's hard to deny that, but of course he did deny it. On his meeting with William in 2021, he said that the resemblance to his mother was vanishing with age. Well, he never saw his mother at William's age, in her 40s, you know. He doesn't seem to bear that in mind. You know, she died at 36, wasn't it? So who's to say what she would have looked like at 40? And I think if you put him in a blonde wig, you'll find out that there's still more than a passing resemblance, my dear, because he has wonderful blue eyes like her, large, blue, clear and open, with moments of mischief. It's almost as if Willie got all the wonderful elements of Diana, whereas Harry... And as well as noticing this vanishing resemblance of Diana, Harry also noticed William's alarming baldness coming on at an astonishing rate, quicker than Harry's. And Bradby says, isn't this rather cutting, this description of this conversation? No, Harry says. Cutting? No, I don't see it as cutting at all, he says. No. I mean, you know, we talk about gaslighting, my dears. Well, I said, Harry and Meghan talk about gaslighting. If Charles and William are so guilty of gaslighting you by denying your aspersions that you cast all the time, you know, if they're so guilty of that, are you not doing exactly the same thing yourself, Harold? Well, I'll answer on your behalf, my dear. Yes, the answer is yes. In fact, you gaslight your way through this entire tome, by the sounds of it, and through both of these interviews. Gaslighting. Why do you not renounce your titles? Anderson Cooper asked, very fairly. And what difference would that make, says Harry. And what difference would that make? Doesn't like being challenged, does he? Doesn't like being... the press have made a real meal about this, because he's come over very petulant. You know, he began off in the Bradby interview looking really rather reasonable. And then as it went on, and as he was challenged more and more, you saw this prickly side of him, didn't you? This quick... When he's challenged, the eyes will sort of glaze over a bit, and there'll be that sniff, that twitch, and then immediately the parry back. He wants to quickly jab you in there before you go any further, my dear. Well, it was already said and already noticed. Very hot-headed, and he is revealing to the world how difficult he must be to work with, to live with, and to handle. And if you insist, Harry, that it wouldn't make a difference, why would it make such a difference? Then why not renounce them? You know, it works both ways. If it doesn't make a difference to you and your ability to merch and besmirch, for example, then why don't you just renounce them? Give them up. And then we get on to the insufferably maddening subject of unconscious bias, where Harry suggests that William's opinion of Meghan wasn't well formed because it was clouded by his judgment of her as, and he counts it on 4 fingers in one of the interviews, American actress, divorced and biracial. It's almost as if he's chanted it off by rote again and again. American actress, divorced, biracial. That's how William saw her. Although I notice in the UK version he uses the word biracial, but he caters for an American audience in the American version and ditches the word biracial, and instead she is black. Did you notice that? She's black. And then he quickly says, well, black mother. So be it. 4 stereotypes, he says. 4 stereotypes that becomes a feeding frenzy for the British press. And he suggests, as he does all the time, that all the daily newspapers that are spread out over breakfast that he obviously is poring over and spends his whole life reading, he and Rachel, he seems to suggest that these daily newspapers inform all of the royal family's opinions. Have you noticed that? As if they haven't got a brain and can't think for themselves. And also, sort of disregarding the fact that they've all experienced your stereotyping of the tabloid press. Every single one of them. And the ones that were born into the family, like Harry, have experienced it every day of their life. So does he really think that they're so unsophisticated that they can't understand the nuance of that they can't understand what the press are doing, the mischief of the press, and that they can't extrapolate what they need to from that information to get to the truth? They really think that William, of all people, that grew up with it, that saw his mother, just like Harry, and for more years under the burden and the stress of being judged by the press, does he really think that he's going to pick up the Daily Express or whatever rag might be besmirching Rachel, Daily Mail, whoever it is, and think, oh, well, you know, this must be Bible. If the Daily Mail says it, I'm going to believe it. And moreover, back in that day, the Daily Mail didn't have anything bad to say about the gown anyway, no matter how he goes on crowing about it. And he got very prickly when Bradby almost challenged him on the press coverage of Meghan when she first came into the royal family. Are you suggesting that there wasn't any racist coverage? Are you suggesting? No one dare contradict him. Well, the truth is, Harold, as your family obviously tried to impress upon you, is that if you look for disparagement, you'll find it in some corner of the internet or in some rag. Of course you will. There'll be some article, but in the millions of articles that were published about your wife in the run-up to that wedding, as soon as she hustled her way into the family, and, you know, for the first few months and years, all those millions of articles were just glowing with praise and hyping her up to the nines and to the rafters. And yes, there might have been 1 or 2 centimetres of disparagement. And yes, some of it might have had the undertones of unconscious bias. But I mean, get a life. If it was the other way around, or even if the coverage had been 50-50, then you might have had a very good point, my dear. But you are mispresenting the British press, the British people, and even your own family. And I've got to say, this was the point where I wish that Tom Bradby had pushed a little further there, because he was beginning to get under Harry's skin. Harry was getting prickly at the suggestion that unconscious bias isn't responsible for every negative opinion of Rachel. No, it isn't. Unconscious bias isn't always responsible for the formation of negative opinions. And Harry doesn't seem to be able to come to terms with that fact. I think the big story and the big takeaway from these interviews, of course, was the dramatic U-turn on the accusations of racism. But I didn't accuse anyone of racism. Oh, what are you suggesting? I didn't accuse my family of any such thing. Oh, really? And he sniffed away again with his discomfiture. Very uncomfortable when challenged. I never said they were racist. I never said that. What a hypocrite. Because we've heard Harry go on and on recently about how the royal family's silence was deafening. The fact that they didn't say anything says something. Silence was deafening. Well, if their silence was deafening, how resounding was yours, my dear? The silence in the wake of the racism scandal after Oprah Winfrey, when you tarred them with that brush of questions and concerns about the colour of Archie's skin. Was that not silence from Montecito when the entire world went ballistic at the royal family, hurling accusations at them? Your own flesh and blood, as well as the institution you were born into, went mad at them. Political opponents of the monarchy, Commonwealth friends, former colonies all over the world, given an excuse to bash them all over their head, including on the tour of Jamaica undertaken by the Cambridges at the time. All throughout that, you could have spoken up and told the world, actually, no, they're not racist, as you seem to be suggesting now. 2 years later. 2 years later. You know, you talk about briefings and leaking and planting. What about your briefing to Oprah Winfrey? You only exonerated the Queen and Prince Philip when that all emerged, didn't you? Yes, you took the trouble via Gayle King to let the world know, it wasn't the Queen or Prince Philip. It might have been any of the others, but it wasn't the Queen or Prince Philip, because you wanted to stay in Queenie's good books. You threw the rest of them to the wolves, didn't you, as your wife would say. They didn't just throw me, they fed me to the wolves. Well, they're not the only ones capable of doing that, apparently. Shouldn't you be leading by example? You want to live to lead. Well, shouldn't you be showing the way by sticking up for them? Well, they never stuck up for me. Oh, it's so tit for tat, isn't it, my dear? We know whose tit you're tatting. Anyway. No, I didn't. The British press said that. Well, you could have corrected the British press, seeing as you're so keen on everybody going out issuing statements of protection. It was an international scandal, my dear, and you refused to quell the fire, didn't you? You poured petrol on it. You poured diesel on that furnace and let it burn. Yes, you did. You did not correct the narrative, and now you shift around in your seat, sniffling, as if you're, you know what don't stink, my dear. Your manure don't stink. Well, it does, and it is a stench that wafts over the Atlantic Ocean on the breeze and can be sensed from the highest corners, from John O'Groats to Land's End, my dear. But after watching these interviews, it seems to have become even more apparent to the world and the press, who are all talking about this, that conversation, or conversations, because they contradicted each other of when the conversations took place, when she was pregnant, when she wasn't pregnant, it's become absolutely abundantly clear that that conversation was benign, that there was nothing in it, that all they simply did was wonder what the bairn may look like, complexion-wise. And Harry says, and this is where you think, who is he hanging out with? You speak to any other mixed-race couple around the world and you will probably find that the white side of the family have either openly discussed it or secretly discussed what are the kids going to look like. Well, this shows his own ignorance, my dear, and I haven't got time to pull them out now because there are literally thousands, and if you're a regular of this channel, you'll know it, and I'm sure many of the other royal commentating channels. It is in proliferation, the amount of comments from people of colour, from black people, from mixed race families, under hundreds of videos. When I say thousands of comments about this, I am not exaggerating on my own channel. Thousands of comments from these people saying that it is absolutely normal and natural for black families, mixed families, like any family, like my own family. The black members of my own family do exactly the same as the white members of the family when a baby's due. Of course they do. That doesn't mean they have concerns. You know, Meghan says questions and concerns about the colour. Now, questions I can believe. Concerns, now that's a horse of a different colour, as they say in The Wizard of Oz. That's a horse of a different colour. Concerns are something else. But Harry is the one with the bias, my dear. He is the royal racist. He is the royal racist. Because he disparages white families and this, as if black families don't have any questions, or conversations about the colour of a baby to be. It's usually done with pride, with love, and just curiosity. It's absolutely natural. Wonder what features you might get from this race, that race, this wonderful mix. Absolutely natural. He is so patronising, but and the reason why he says he will never go into more detail on this alleged conversation or conversations is, one, because he knows that if the true details emerged about it, then the world would understand there was nothing in it. And secondly, it would leave him open to being sued. Being sued. So as long as he doesn't actually name one individual, then as a collective, they're never going to sue him. And I don't believe that they would sue him anyway, but it leaves him open to that possibility, doesn't it? For is it defamation or slander? Slander in this case. But he continues on unconscious bias once it's been acknowledged or pointed out to you, which I've got to say are two different things. Yes, one can acknowledge that one holds a certain bias, an unconscious bias, but having it pointed out to you is not the same thing. It doesn't mean that one has to accept it. It seems that Harry points these things out unendingly to William and Charles and the royal family, where they're going or where their bias is. But perhaps they consider what he's saying, but don't accept it, and don't consider that their biases, as he put it, are unconscious or come from a place of bias anyway. They might just be well thought out logical opinions. And anyway, he says, once it's been acknowledged or pointed out to you as an individual or as an institution that you have unconscious bias, you therefore have an opportunity to learn and grow from that, so that you are part of the solution rather than the problem. It's straight from a textbook, isn't it? Straight from a textbook on critical race theory. These people waffle on with these nuggets, these worthless nuggets. There's no gold in these nuggets, my dear, just dust. And, he compares it to the episode with Lady Susan Hussey. Oh, we love Susan. Meg and I love Lady Susan Hussey. We know what she meant. So, on the one hand, he defends Susan Hussey and says that she didn't mean anything, but then goes on to, suggest that it was unconscious bias, and has the absolute temerity, and this was so vulgar and so disappointing, to bring the Fulani name into it and give her an international platform. And goes, Fulani, and what she went through. What she went through, seriously, because someone asked her where she's from. Sheesh Louise. Unbelievable. It still rattles me, that episode with Susan Hussey. It still rattles me. I'm still disappointed in William. And, people also forget that she isn't even a member of the royal family, as much as a part of palace life that she is. She's not an official representative in the same capacity. Throughout these interviews, he appears cocksure is the lad, that the penny's going to drop at Buckingham Palace, and that his family will see the light, see he was right all along, and plead for their return. You can tell that he is desperate for them to just suddenly plead, please come back, we need you, the institution needs you, the Commonwealth needs you, it's collapsing. He arrogantly states that the Sussexes would be a great help. Well, it is actually true, as we've said before, that they would have been a wonderful asset to the royal family if their personalities were completely different. It's never going to work them the way they are, is it? It's never going to work. I don't go looking for disparagement. If I wanted to, look at me, dear. I could probably find it, I could find a lot of praise as well, and a lot of joyous sentiments, but I'm sure I could find a hell of a lot of disparagement if I went looking for it, if I sought it out and, took umbrage at it. But, it comes down to an attitude to life, isn't it, my dear? And Harry and Rachel are those characters that go looking for it, you see. And that is why they will always find it. That is why even if there was reconciliation and they were invited back to help out, to resurrect the Commonwealth and save the monarchy, as they seem to think that they would be wont to do, they would within a matter of weeks find something else to rally against, wouldn't they? And find something else to be hugely offended by. This was another delicious moment of the Bradby interview, where Harry gave one of his little flinches of annoyance, because they were discussing one of the confrontations with William, and Bradby said, well, I think that William would say he found you emotional, defensive. He couldn't get through to you. And Harry snaps and he says, that's quite a list of assumptions you're making. And, it's so, you can see the petulance there, because all Bradby was doing was playing devil's advocate. He's a journalist. The audience need a bit of meat on the bone, and he knows that they just don't want a puff piece. He's got to be challenged in some way, have a bit of friction. So that was all he was doing. But you could sense Harry's annoyance, couldn't you? That's quite a lot of assumptions you're making. Well, he wasn't assuming anything. He was playing devil's advocate. Although I fancy he was seeing through the cracks a bit. And it might have been Bradby's own volition about you. But he was just putting himself in our position as the viewing audience and trying to question you, Harry, on what we're all thinking, which is that you are obviously very emotional and defensive, and that he couldn't get through to. And they're also, if there are assumptions there, they're based on your own tales, my dear, and your own stories. We hear in this tome at one point, William grips you. He grips you and says, I love you, Harry. I love you. I just want you to be happy. You know, so it's reasonable assumptions that people are making in the absence of any counter-argument from William, because we're not going to get that from him as our future king. He's dignified. He'll keep a royal silence, as he should, and won't be... Well, I'm sure you'll suggest that he will leak to the press and plant stories, this, that, and the first, but... In your head, in your head, in your head... And moreover, Harold, your entire tome appears to be one long ream of assumptions, you know, one epic array of assumptions and interpretations and recollections. Recollections may vary. Well, I don't know what the media atmosphere is overseas, internationally, or in America today, but certainly here in the kingdom, it's not great for Harry, I've got to tell you. It's not great. Most people are impatient with him, fed up with him. I mean, it's no surprise that the press aren't going to be saying very fond things about him today in light of what he's been saying about them, so I do take that into account. But the general feeling and the general consensus from people is that it's not good. And I have seen a lot of people saying that Harry has made the mistake of thinking that he is playing into the hands of American audiences by appeasing them, by having a more open attitude, you know, sort of revealing more, divulging all aspects of his life. But what he hasn't really quite understood is that many of our friends and our fruity admirers overseas in America, actually the thing that drew them to monarchy and royalty was that there is, you know, we all know that in their private lives they're human, but as you saw over the last year at the Jubilee and the funeral, they embody and symbolise class and dignity. And most people with the brain don't expect them to live every ounce of their life flawlessly as flawless individuals, but to have a head of state and an institution that represents us and represents those good virtues and those qualities is something that is sorely lacking in modern society. And everybody can see William and Catherine trying to do a good job, and Charles and Camilla trying to do a good job. And yes, that includes accepting their own history, demons for want of a better word, you know, the challenges that they've faced, mistakes that they've all made. You know, they still try to put their best foot forward and serve the country and do their duty. And America perhaps is starting to see through the cracks of the Montecito show, the spectacle. And of course, I am well aware that many Americans were already aware of that, so you don't have to tell me that. I'm told all the time in the comments that anybody with common sense can see through them. But I'm just speaking generally, and, you know, especially the sort of audiences that are cultivated by the Harkles, the kind of demographics that they want to draw in. It was splendid to see you, my dears. Thank you so much for dropping by. I really do appreciate it, you know. It's always divine. It's always divine to read through your comments. Do leave me a nice juicy one if you'd so care to. I must also give an extra special thanks to those of you that have left me a tip jar treat, either recently or through the Christmas months. Some of you expressed your thanks. And in fact, it's seldom that a week goes by without at least one or two of you leaving me a tip jar treat. Which always is nice to wake up to and gives me a nice smile. So I do thank you most sincerely for that, I really do. But moreover, I thank each and every one of you basketeers out in the fruit basket for always giving me your fruity attention and bringing a smile to my face. It's fun to go through life together in that way, isn't it? And share some of these absurd experiences and also a few giggles. And My mission is merely to give you a wry smile and a chuckle here and there, and also remind you to keep things fruity and stay on royal duty, my dear. Channel the royal spirit at all times, and if you've forgotten to, go out right now and pick up some pearls, pick up some jewels and gems. It doesn't even matter if they're from their thrift store, Goodwill, or you find them on the street, my dear. Just chuck them on, be dripping, and dress up your life, my dear. It's a fancy dress parade. Decorate it, find the royalty in the moment, and then you will always have a mischievous grin on the inside that is naughty but also rather haughty. You see, it's the spice of life, my dear, the spice of life. See you in the next broadcast, and toodle pip.